Welcome to the Imbalance Podcast, a place where we navigate the struggles and perks of single mom life, the ebbs and flows of my work in the beauty industry, quality relationships, working through personal traumas, and finding our higher purpose. Sounds like a lot of struggling? Well, it is. So grab a drink and let's try and balance it together, because who said we have to navigate through this chaos alone? Welcome to your weekly dose of mom brain, unfinished tasks, work fatigue, and simply trying to balance the imbalanceable with me, Kat, your host. So today I wanted to bring one of my friends on here to have a really good conversation about presidential election, what's going on in the world, why it's important to vote, who the nominees are. We know who they are, but also the fact that there are other options. And I want to highlight that because, most of us are just familiar with the two-party system. I don't want to say it surprises me because I know why, but whenever I'm looking at comments on certain videos or something of how many people didn't realize that you can vote outside of red or blue. And I want to just have a conversation surrounding the propaganda behind it, surrounding why people feel that you may be wasting a vote if you outsource to an independent party, and just really dive deep into it, because I will preface this by saying I'm not telling you who to vote for. First of all, I don't get paid to endorse any of these people. Let's make that clear. And second, I don't have an answer. Like, to me, I feel like most people who, like, we on the same wavelength, like, we don't want that man to win. We are like, that's already there. That's foundational. But as far as our options, right? Would I love to see a Black woman as the president of the United States of America? Yes, I would. But I also don't want that to be at the cost of people who can't speak up, of people that are being killed and murdered at the expense of our freedom and our money. I don't, and just so many other things that come with it, and the party system and all of that. So I feel like a lot of people may be in that boat, or a lot of people may be in the boat of like, no, like, this is a no-brainer for me. I'm voting for her. And, you have every right to do so. You have the right to vote. If you have the right to vote, then you should practice that. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation today, because this presidential election just seems to be, all of them are really important, but this one just seems to be, this one is a toughie. This one is a toughie because I feel like a lot of us have opened our eyes since what's happened in Palestine and, like, the other issues around the world, and how the US has their hands in it. I feel like a lot of us are like, no, like, I don't want to vote for the lesser evil, especially when there's a lot of lip service. You say you want a ceasefire, but why is it not being implemented? And I know a lot of it is just so much more than that, but at what point are we going to just care about humanity and not just be like, well, since we're eating, we're fine? And I feel like I wanted to have this conversation on the episode, but I didn't want to do it alone because, number one, I do not have the credentials to really be talking about politics by myself. And number two, I have a lot of good conversations with people, especially Charles. Like, we have a ton of conversations about what's going on in the world. And I feel like he does a really good job at breaking down for in lamest terms, for the common folk, of what this stuff means and why it's important to be involved. Starting with your local government, that is probably going to be where you see the most change, and or where you can make a difference. So again, November 5th, go out and vote. There are ways to vote if you are able to vote. And I just think it's important for us, especially women. They trying to take our rights away, especially Black and brown folk. They speak around us and they speak about us and what they're going to do for us, but we need to make sure we're putting someone in there who actually understands, actually knows that we deserve the same resources to not live somewhere that's going to cause us health issues 20 years later because they put a fucking neighborhood in a disposable zone where they burn trash, or during a certain part of the highway where the pollution from the cars causes fucking cancer or asthma for half of the tenants in an apartment. Like, we deserve to know what they're doing underneath us and have policies in place to ensure that we are taken care of. So, again, I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and remember to like, share, subscribe, all of the things. Leave a review however you wish, and enjoy the show. Well, welcome, Charles. Thank you for being here. I wanted to bring you on because we just always have really good conversations about everything, but specifically politics and like things like that. So, if you can give us a little background info about you and the things that shaped you and led you to the passion that you have for your community.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for having me. Uh, I've lived all over the country. I've lived in the West Coast in LA. I've lived in the Midwest in both Kansas City and St. Louis. And I've also lived in the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and briefly in Virginia. Um, I think during that time, I've become very involved in politics, um, particularly around 2014 when Ferguson popped off. It happened 15 minutes away from where I attended school. Um, so it was a very radicalizing time for me, I'd say. I showed up to a protest. It was around the time that I was still very much like, I would say, a Democrat in those moments. And I thought I was exercising my constitutionally given right to go protest. Um, and then they started shooting tear gas canisters at people that were not doing anything. And at least for me, I, I started running. I didn't know what to do in that moment. But I do remember going home and sort of watching the news and seeing how that protest was very much demonized on mass media, calling protesters violent, saying that a lot of these protesters were foreign protesters, like either outside of the country or outside of state lines, coming just to uh, cause division. So I think that kind of propelled me into wanting to learn more about politics. I was part of the debate team at the time, which demanded that I do a lot of research, uh, particularly so that we can write cases that would help us argue better, make arguments. But this research took me into like a really deep dive of knowledge that's not, I would say, given on mainstream media. I quickly realized that I was picking up skills and knowledge that my community didn't have. The longest place I stayed in was in LA, where I lived there for about 12, 13 years. But I quickly realized that these skills that I was picking up were not very common in my communities. And I think sometimes, from the communities that I come from, we might not have the vocabulary to really express what we're feeling or air out our grievances. And people will sometimes just dismiss us because we can't properly communicate with each other. Um, so then it led me onto this path of organizing, of using these skills that I was picking up and using this knowledge and sharing it with my community, um, so that they could also have these skills and this knowledge, and to take it forward and to really just help the community come together and rise up for their needs. Next thing I know, I'm in Washington, D.C., years later, and I'm organizing, and I become a candidate for the PSL. The PSL, they're called the Party for Socialism and Liberation. One thing I noticed about them is that they were very much in line with my form of thinking. My thinking was very much based in liberation for all when I started. And it quickly developed into learning about Marxism and what that meant, and it I stumbled upon socialism and communism and these big words that I had heard multiple times in my childhood, but I always heard it in a very negative manner, and so I started doing my own research into it. Um, and I realized quickly that a lot of my thoughts around liberation were very much running parallel to socialism and communism. I feel like since then, my passion and my love for community have sort of morphed into a political organizer role, and I remain passionate about it to this day. It just brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, and I can vouch for you that you are very passionate at what you do. If you want to share too what you are organizing for today.
For sure. So today here in Kansas City, we are organizing an action for Mr. Marcellus Williams. I have a little flyer right here. This is not our flyer, but this is one that I was given a couple weeks ago. About maybe like 20 years ago, he was convicted of a murder of a reporter. To this day, and for the last 20 years, he has maintained his innocence. Um, Back in 2017, he was due to be executed, but a lot of people organized and came out against the execution because there was evidence that he was not tied to the murder weapon through DNA testing. It seems that the murder weapon had been contaminated by the prosecuting attorney and the arresting officer. So it really begs the question of, not only the integrity of the people that were sending him to jail, but it really begs the question too, um, if there's no DNA evidence linking him to the murder weapon, did he even commit the murder?
Right.
Um, so in 2017, they canceled the execution date, and the governor at that time, his name was Greetens. I might be mispronouncing that, but Governor Greetens basically canceled the execution after a massive public outcry against this execution, and they formed a board to investigate his case, to really see, what could be taken to court. Um, and what needed to be resolved. But then Governor Mike Parsons came in, who is the current governor, and he dissolved the board entirely. He didn't allow them to conclude their investigation. Marcellus Williams brought a civil trial against the government for having dissolved that board, but the Supreme Court of Missouri dismissed the suit. I want to say earlier this year, the district attorney in St. Louis, his name is Wesley Bell, he concluded that there was enough evidence for Marcellus Williams to show that he did not commit the murder. Andrew Bailey, he's currently the attorney general, he basically said we don't care that they didn't have enough judicial power to come to that conclusion. So now that's where we're at right now. His execution is set for September 24th, which is tomorrow. And people are feeling anxious. People are feeling anxious. There's a lot of public awareness of this,
Yeah.
and I think with what has happened in Palestine this past year with the genocide that's ongoing there, I think people are more attuned and waking up to when innocent people are dying. Um, and I think the question for a lot of people right now, and not just in Missouri, but also nationally, is Missouri really about to execute an innocent man.
Hey all! Some of you may already know this, but besides being your podcast host, I'm also a cosmetologist. I have been in the beauty industry for the past 12 years and I specialize in curly hair care, hair cutting, and coloring in the Northern Virginia area. My books are open, and if you'd ever like to book an appointment with me, please visit my website at www.kathlena.com. I also offer an adult and child versions of my ebook, Your Natural Hair Wash and Go Style Guide, which provides key information behind the science of hair, step-by-step wash, condition, and styling process, product recommendations, and more. Purchase right now and enjoy $10 off, no code required. Now back to the show.
The death penalty here in the United States has a very long racist history. That, if the victim is a white woman, for example, the person accused, which is usually a black man, is three times more than likely to be given execution. And, these are racial tropes that we still deal with, whenever Emmett Till, a little teenager, was accused of even looking at a white woman. He was murdered for this, and his murderers were acquitted. They went free. It wasn't until years later that they found out that Emmett Till had never even looked at this woman, had never touched her or assaulted her or anything. And even the woman herself admitted it. Whenever I mention the history and what's currently going on today, I'm not asking for people to like compare and like contrast the differences between yesterday and today. Sadly, there is no difference. It's still very much the reality of today. Instead of it being a lynching by random people on a Tuesday afternoon, it's now a state mandated lynching with random people on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, no, you bring up that's such a good point. That although we like to believe that, oh, we're progressive, you know, we've came such a long way since the civil rights. It's like we haven't though. There's still so much work to be done. And like I think I DM'd this to you, but there was a case that I just saw. I don't know the end result of it, but it was the other day in South Carolina. They were said to execute a man, and this is like their first execution in like 13 years. But they were set to execute a man who was a black man who was accused of killing someone during a robbery, a store clerk. And then evidence came out later that I guess the person he committed the robbery with actually admitted to being the one that killed the person and not the dude on death row.
Wow.
So I need to look up what ended up happening because apparently it was like within hours before he was supposed to get executed that they were trying. I think that they said the court declined his, plea. And I'm just like, so are you saying that you might have killed someone who may have been innocent and like that's it?
Mm.
So it's so sad.
Yeah, it's very sad indeed. But I always tell community folks that as sad as it may be, we have to continue the work.
Yeah,
Mr. Khalifa Marcellus Williams, he's just one individual um, within the hundreds that are on death row, and so many of them possibly being innocent.
so true. Well, I hope you guys have a good turnout later today. I'm sure
Thank
I'll get to see, the outcome of all that. So I want to kind of switch over to big presidential election that's coming up and the options that we have. We always know that we have the blue or the red, but what are some things that you can tell people what you shared with me about the importance of knowing that we do have other options?
Yeah, yeah. I guess first off, to anyone listening, Please don't think voting for a third party is throwing away your vote. It's not. Your vote should not be held hostage by big parties that are basically saying, hey, vote for us or else.
Mm-hmm.
That's a threat.
Right.
Uh, like, um, and it's sad to see that a lot of people do fall for that, but I think it's also important to withhold your vote, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
having the right to vote also implies having the right to not vote or to vote for another party.
Right.
There's power in withholding that vote from big parties, and there's power in also applying that vote to a third party. Me personally, like, I'm in the PSL, so right now I'm currently campaigning for Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia, who are the presidential and vice presidential candidates for our party. However, I'd like to bring up the Green Party. A couple months ago, the Green Party achieved enough support in all 50 states to provide Jill Stein with Secret Service protection. Because at that point she had, the numbers, I guess you could say, and the funding to be provided Secret Service protection. That meant that she was becoming a very viable, possible candidate for the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government also had to provide them with public funding for their campaigns. Public funding, which is given to Republicans and Democrats because they achieve like certain thresholds in whenever it comes to the rules of like voting commissions in the United States. Well, the Green Party also achieved those thresholds,
Mm-hmm.
but they were not given public funding. And this is still an issue that's running through the court system right now as to whether the government violated their rights by not providing them with public funding for their campaign. Um, we see the Green Party being taken to court by the Democrats in multiple states, getting their candidates off the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
A criticism that I hear about the Green Party is that, oh, like, why are you only running president and vice president, but you're not running senators or you're not running House of Representatives people? Um, well, they're being ran, they're just being kicked off the ballot by Democrats in very weird legal ways. There's a term for it. People call it a lawfare. It's basically when you're engaging in warfare through the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
And the Green Party, thankfully, has been very successful in fighting back against getting kicked off the ballot in many of these places where they've gotten thousands of signatures to get on the ballot. Um, but I fear that in maybe one or two states, they will be kicked off the ballot. And last minute, too, further fueling these thoughts, right? That, oh, the Green Party doesn't run under other candidates, and they do. There's just a very heavy repressive machine being thrown on them right now, and it's not visible because mainstream media doesn't share it with us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not a lot of people are tapped into the judicial system proceedings that are going on, so they're not seeing this stuff that's moving behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of movement. But in terms of voting for third parties, though, there's power in that because you're actually able to vote your conscience. Right now in the last debate that Donald Trump had with Kamala Harris, I don't know if you saw the debate, but at least to me,
I didn't watch that mess.
yeah, I didn't watch that mess either. I had nothing to gain from it, but
Yeah.
I did see clips of it, and from the clips of it that I saw, it was basically It was basically Kamala and Trump opposing each other and vying for the will of the ruling class. Like they were basically like, "Oh, you love Israel, I love Israel more. Like
Hmm.
you'll give Israel 10,000 bombs, I'll give them 20,000 bombs." And
But we
yeah,
have to vote. We got to vote for the lesser evil, though, right?
exactly, And I'm just like, wow, like they're both super evil.
Yeah.
Um, in Kamala Harris's acceptance speech at the DNC when she was accepting the nomination for presidency, she said that she would build the most lethal army in the world. That's a threat. That's a threat to the world because the U.S. is already the most lethal threat in the world. They occupy countries. They overthrow governments. That's not just in the 1950s that had occurred. It still very much happens like in 2024.
Hmm.
Um, they just do it through NGOs or nonprofits, but the links are there. Um, but it's very much her giving talking points to the war industry in the United States, which since the Israel genocide on Palestine began, they've been maxing out their profits.
Yeah.
Building bombs, building missiles. Um, their profits have skyrocketed. Like if you look at BlackRock, which is one of the war profiteers here in the U.S., their stock price has surged since the genocide began. So there's people that have an interest in allowing for war to continue because they make money off of it. That to me doesn't sound like the lesser evil.
Right.
If anything, it just sounds like someone who's going to be more effective at killing someone. Um,
Yeah.
that's scary. But with third parties, you don't have to walk away from the voting booth feeling like you have blood on your hands. Um, I remember there was one time that I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 because I bought into the whole narrative of like we need to stop Trump.
Yeah.
Trump was a worse candidate by far, um, but I walked away from that voting booth feeling dirty because Hillary Clinton had enacted massacres in Latin America under Obama's presidency when she was acting as Secretary of State. Um, my family's from Guatemala, so I tap into their politics in those regions too, and I saw how Hillary Clinton acted. So I felt dirty having voted for her because it
Right.
felt like I had voted for someone who had caused a lot of death and pain in Central America. Um, and regardless, Trump won. He went on to win. And he went on to do very terrible things. But now with these third parties that are surging in 2024, I think one of the reasons why they're surging so much compared to 2020, 2016, and 2012 is because people are desperate for an alternative.
Let's stay connected. You can find me on Instagram at imbalanced with cat or on my website imbalancedpod.com. Give me a follow or a podcast review and I'd love to share it on air. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed this show.